Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another How to Succeed podcast. I'm your host, Mike Montague, Director of Community Engagement at Sandler. And my guest this week is Dr. Eli Jones, Professor of Marketing at Texas A&M. He has also been the Dean. Dean Emeritus, and he's an endowed scholar there. Also author of the new book, Making Differences Work. So we're going to talk to him about that. He co-wrote the book with Paul Sarvadi. How do you say that?
Yes, you got it. Paul Sarvadi.
And we're going to talk all about it this time. This is How to Succeed at Making Differences Work. All right, Dr. Eli Jones, welcome to the podcast. Tell us about the book and how it came to be here a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Mike. I'm really glad to be with you. I'm a big fan of Sandler. You know that. Michael Norton.
I know, and you're going to come speak at the summit. I forgot to mention that too. He's also
I'm going to be at the summit in March.
At the summit 2024. Get those tickets, sandler.com/summit.
That's right. Yeah. Thank you. So I appreciate the introduction. So we have a late breaking book. In fact, we're just now publishing it. It's a project that we've been working on for a couple of years. Let me tell you a little bit about my co-author, because he's a pretty amazing guy. His name is Paul Sarvadi. He is the co-founder of Insperity. Now, Insperity is an HR outsourcing company. So for those people in their own business, small, mid-sized businesses, if you want to outsource all your HR, that is, outsource your payroll, your benefits, workers' compensation, take all of those headaches away. All right, you need to look at Insperity, Insperity. The stock symbol is NSP. It's an amazing organization. And so Paul has built that organization, and it's doing very well. So I'll give you a little bit of background. So we engaged in this a couple of years ago, and it started out with this push for DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what we wanted to do is highlight commonalities, not differences. And so the approach that we're taking is more of a cultural approach. And that is, how do you build an organization, a culture in the organization where you enhance sense of belonging? If you look at the literature, the research on sense of belonging, you can get some significant outcomes once you fully engage your employees. So it's appropriate for an HR company to be engaged in this kind of research. So on my full-time job as a researcher, so I conduct research for a lot of different companies. And Paul and I got together, and we started talking about it. And here's the background on it. So once we started talking about how do we build commonalities, not differences, highlight commonalities, not talk about how different we are. And I started with a focus group. I put together several focus group sessions. And I asked a group of executives. These are people who are working professionals. They're going through our executive MBA program. And I asked them, I said, look, tell me a little bit about how effective your DEI programs are at your companies. All right. And we went around the table and we talked about that. And we talked about, well, what do you mean by effectiveness? That was a common question. What do you mean by effectiveness? Good question, right? What do we mean? And so if you ask leaders of organizations to measure their effectiveness, typically what you'll hear is, well, we went through this training, unconscious bias training for the most part. All right. Mm-hmm. And we checked the box. We sent our employees through the training programs. We checked the box. We're good. Is it? Is that how we want to measure effectiveness? And so Paul and I started by saying, look, what is it that every organization really wants? Every organization, in terms of employee engagement. And what we know is every organization, you talk to our Insperity clients, they'll tell you, we want employees who will conduct their performance over and above what's expected, for starters. All right. So how do we get this, discretionary effort? So I belong to this company and I'm going to do more than what is expected of me. All right. That's one. Secondly, how do we align our values? So my values are in sync with the company's values, right? That's the alignment that we're talking about. All right. Values. That's key. How do we inspire creativity in our organizations? How do we get our teams working so that they're looking at the new ideas and they are inspired to look at new ideas, right? And how do we inspire collaboration within our organizations, right? So those are the four. So start with those four. How do we do those four things? How do we get our employees so engaged that they have a sense of belonging? They belong, they feel like they belong to the organization. So this is a cultural thing. It's a people-centric cultural approach. It's not a program. It's not I'm going to send my employees to a program and then I'm going to check the box and say, okay, we did it. It's how do we build a culture that would generate those four outcomes? Now, every organization I've talked to, Mike, everyone, when I start there, everyone says, I'm in. Tell me about it. That's what I want. How do I get there? And so this research that we did, starting with the focus groups, then led to my collecting data inside Insperity, roughly 4,000 employees. All right. And so Paul allowed me to go into his organization, which is bold, by the way. That's a bold. There are some organizations like, oh, please don't tell me what my employees think. Right?
Yeah.
All right.
Let's ask him how we're actually doing.
Right. Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
And so he's a hero to me. He said, no, I want to know exactly what my employees are thinking in this regard. And so we then designed a survey, customized survey, and we then implemented that survey inside his organization. I collected the data, I did the analysis, and I measured those four outcomes that I just mentioned: discretionary effort, team creativity, values alignment, and a collaborative culture. I also measured, because at the time, the state of the art in this DEI space was this sense of belonging. How do we create a sense of belonging, which is still in the literature? It's really powerful. And so we then backed up and said, if we can indeed increase this sense of belonging, we can get those four outcomes. See, it's people-centric, it's cultural. All right. Then we backed up and said, okay, besides D&I, can we look at how our employees feel about commonalities within the organization? And Paul and I, though we look different, we've got amazing commonality. It's just amazing. We started talking about.
Yeah, you had a background in the corporate world before you got into teaching and stuff too.
Sure, right? I did. Yeah. So I worked for Frito-Lay, I worked for Quaker Oats, and I worked for Nabisco. And so, as you know, PepsiCo now owns Quaker Oats. So those two companies combined. But I did that in the mid 80s, and so decided to leave the corporate world to become a full-time academic. So I quit my job, Mike. I gave up my corporate paycheck, and I joined a doctoral program for 4 years with 4 children and a wife.
That's gutsy.
That was a pivot. Yeah, that was a pivot. Yeah, my wife and I are still married, so we made it through.
There you go.
Yeah. So it was a big sacrifice, but then I started. This is my 3rd career, and I've been in this career for now 27 years. But I went through a doctoral program, learned a lot about how to do research. That's what a PhD program is. It teaches you how to conduct research. And so I used those research skills in this particular project to come up with this analysis. All right.
Yeah, I think it is great. So I love that we set that up, and we definitely should check out the book, Making Differences Work.
I got it.
Paul Sarvadi. Yeah, there it is.
There it is right there. Yep.
Got it.
If I get it right, I think you can see it now. Good.
and Dr. Eli Jones and Paul Sarvadi, if you're looking for it on Amazon, it is up there. Okay. Now, the initial question here, I think you've covered a lot of it, is the attitude about a people-centered culture versus the DEI-centered culture or a compliance-centered culture. I think would be the opposites of those.
Yeah.
And maybe the most common misconception is thinking that by highlighting differences, you can get people to come together. Right. And I don't think that's necessarily true. It's okay to celebrate differences and stuff, but that's not creating commonality. It's not creating collaboration by doing that, right?
Yeah, yeah. And, we're very careful about this in the book because, this is not meant to offend any group. It's really meant to inspire organizations to get our employees fully engaged, right? Now, we recognize differences. Sure, we recognize differences. Our focus is on commonality, equality, and cohesion. That's what we're focused on. All right. So imagine an organization with different types of people, right? Which is not bad. If you look at the literature on it, look at the research, all right, you can see absolutely diversity can inspire innovation. That's in the literature, right? So you get a lot of people with different cultural backgrounds around the table. You're making business decisions, all right? And this has been validated more than once. That is, when you get differences in perspectives, differences of thought, diversity of thought, all right, and you hear from your organization as a leadership team, you usually come out with better ideas. You usually come out with more innovation, right?
Yeah. And I want to ask you about how you do that, because in my mind and what we teach at Sandler here, and it's not, I don't think for me revolutionary because I've grown up with this. My dad was a Sandler trainer, but he always used to say that like marriages work the same way. You want people that are opposite behavioral styles. Like, because if you have two funny, outgoing people that never pay attention to the details, like the house is going to be a mess. You're going to be constantly like, nobody's paying the taxes. Everybody's having a good time, but nobody's putting stuff together. If you have two people that are like very detail oriented, serious, and stressed all the time, like nobody's going to be having fun in this marriage either. But if we have opposite people come together in a team, in a marriage, or in a company, but they stay together because of the values, the direction they're going. When you said that earlier, it really clicked for me that we can get a lot of different styles, a lot of different behaviors, communications, personalities. But if we're coming together for a common purpose and values, I think that's what makes people stick together long term. Is that what you found? And how do we actually get people to do that?
Yeah. You want all of your employees pulling on the same rope, right? We're working together. And so you can see now how this becomes a cultural piece. And Paul is big into how to build a culture that's people-centric. You would expect that from an HR company, right?
Right.
That's what makes this so special because, really Insperity is walking the talk. And we're going out to our clients now. We're saying, hey, we need to really implement this kind of thought process of how do we build that kind of culture. To your point, Mike, that's exactly what we're doing here.
Does it start with hiring and bringing in people with values, or is there something that we can do to change the culture if we don't like where it's at now?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I realize most of the audience here, these are salespeople, sales leaders. I teach sales leadership at the graduate level, at the executive level, and at the undergraduate level. So I'm all about leadership in particular. And so you're right about that, Mike. So first, it starts with the selection of people. You're right about that. No matter how they look, what you're really interested in is their core values. What are their core values? Now, I work at a university that really talks a lot, and we try to live the talk about core values. So at Texas A&M, we talk about 6 core values: respect, mutual respect, excellence in all we do, leadership, loyalty, integrity, and selfless service. So we're a big organization. I mean, we're close to 80,000 students. We're one of the largest universities in the country. All right. And we try to bring in students who believe in those core values. Now, we're a big organization. You're always going to have outliers, right? But we really, really try to uphold those 6 core values. All right. And we take those to heart. So when we're selecting students, and we're selecting faculty, and when we're selecting staff, we're really trying to tap into, do you believe in those 6 core values, right? And so this, there are lots of ways, behavioral-based interviewing, that you could ask the right questions and get someone to really elaborate on how they feel about those. Give me some examples of how you've implemented that. So you can do that. So it is definitely in the selection process. There's no question about that. And so Insperity has its core values, pretty much in alignment with what we're talking about, the respect, excellence, leadership, loyalty, integrity, selfless service. There's a little different. There is a little difference there, but the core values of Insperity, when you're selecting your employees, your salespeople, your sales leaders, your senior leaders, it's important that there's that alignment of values. And that's one of the measures we have, the extent to which my personal values align with the values of my university. And in Insperity's case, my personal values, they are in alignment with Insperity's values. So it's that part of the selection. But it's more than that too, right? Once you get these people on board, and we all know I've hired my share of people, people look good on paper, they interview well, they say all the right things, and you still have a bad hire, right? We've all been there. All right. So besides the selection process, it really is too how we build our reward system, our incentive system, how we give equal opportunity to those people for promotions within the organization, right? It's how we build our organization in terms of its norms, in terms of its policies. So we're now looking at how do we build an organization, in particular, looking at our policies first. You'd be amazed how people might think, senior leaders, oh yeah, we give everyone in our organization an equal opportunity for every job available in our organization. So promotions, yes. And in reality, no.
Yeah.
Right? So we've got to build that. And so the organization, Insperity, is doing, I think, a marvelous job of saying, hey, you know what? We're going to work with our clients to help them build a people-centric culture. And there are tools that Insperity these are tools that they're developing to help people assess their own cultures. And that's the starting point.
Yeah, I want to circle back to the assessments and maybe even ask you some of the questions that you did in the research to uncover this. But I also wanted to highlight what you said about compensation, because I think people always ask us here at Sandler about sales compensation, and it can be a big difference. If you weight compensation too much on new business, then we get too much new business, but we don't renew people. If we make it all on renewals, then we get people that just farm these existing clients. They keep their book of business for 20 years, but they never go find new business. And I think in cultures, I've seen that really break down too, where if you're compensating sales on, profitability or the price that they can get, but you're compensating customer success or the delivery teams on a different metric, it can start creating, that non-collaborative culture, the combative culture, where people are fighting different values inside the same organization. Because you're saying over here, we value, customer appreciation, but over here we value profitability. And all of a sudden those two things come in conflict sometimes, right?
You're on such a good topic. I've done my fair share of executive education looking at competing metrics inside your organization. That is so common. It really is so common. Hey, we want to have team collaboration, and we design an incentive plan that really rewards kind of a lone wolf mentality. It's like, no, I'm fighting for myself. It's every person for themselves in this organization. But yet we're saying, hey, we really want team collaboration. That happens so much. And you look at your metrics, take a deep dive and look at those metrics. I would love to work with some of your folks and just looking at those metrics. I worked with one global organization a few years ago, and it was really all about that. So I started asking the senior leaders, give me all of your measures. Now, we know this, right? People will do what you measure and reward. We got that, right? As leaders, we know that. Sometimes we have so many metrics that we create confusion in our organization.
I'm glad you brought that up too, because I thought that about values. I think 6 might even be pushing it, is you can't really have 6 priorities at the same time. You end up with 1 or 2 that are really important, and then a bunch of secondary ones sometimes. But I'd be open to hearing other discussions on that. Some places have 12 values listed on the wall or something, and I'm like, I don't even know how you remember the whole list, let alone prioritize them all the same way. But I love that point you made about tying the metrics and what you're measuring to those, because I think also not even competing wise, it's just what you're measuring and what you're rewarding has nothing to do with the values at all. So
Correct.
we say we value this, but we're not measuring anything in line with those. We're measuring completely different profitability metrics that other, MBA programs said we should measure, not what really matters in our organizations. A lot.
Yeah. In my graduate course, I spent a lot of time with these future leaders, right? And we talk a lot about incentivizing and how to design compensation plans, how to reward behaviors. And we look at input and output kinds of metrics. Now, we know this in sales, right? So we look at an input, a number of calls made. Okay, good. That's a good starting point. And then we look at the output. So what are the results? What's your closing ratio? What are the, those kinds of things. So input and output. We also look at objective performance metrics and subjective performance metrics. And as you know, you got to have a little bit of it all. Input, output, subjective and objective measures. But at the same time, you could have too many. So that's it. What is that sweet spot? How do you combine those kinds of measures in a way that's consistent with your overall culture? Right.
Well, that was maybe going to be my last question for you here. So circling back to the questions that you asked, if a leader is interested in this, I really like those 4 things that you highlighted. Did you ask those directly, or are there indirect questions like what could we do to find out if our culture is, people-centered, if it is proactive, healthy, creative, collaborative? How would a leader know if it's not? Because I think everybody's going to say, oh, these are our values. We publish these on the website. This is the culture we want. But how do they know what culture they have? And how did you find this out?
Sure. So the measures that we use, one I developed personally. I developed this commonality measure. And so when we do the research, we go through all these diagnostics to make sure that we're measuring exactly what we intend to measure, right? So I'm not going to bore you with all those statistical things that we do in the background, scale purification kinds of things. But for the most part, in this case, we measured perceptions, all right? And the beauty of the kind of research we do is, as a university, a research university, we guarantee confidentiality because we want people to participate. That's the starting point, right? So I don't share the individual's answers with Paul or his team, all right? I show an aggregated number, the averages of how people in general feel about these issues that we're talking about, right? And so that's the starting point. And we have to guarantee that, because otherwise people, this, if they feel like, oh, my boss is going to see the results, they're not going to answer truthfully, right? The other safeguard we have in our research is there's a measure, and it's existed for many years in this kind of research. It really is called, based on their social norms, we're able to measure the extent to which people are answering these questions to be politically correct. It's called a social desirability measure. And so when we engage in this kind of research, we also measure, it's a separate thing. It seems weird when you're taking a survey because the questions are really kind of cool, but they're like, what is it? What are they asking here? Why are they asking this? We're asking it to make sure you're not answering just to be politically correct. What are your true feelings? And we have a measure that captures that. And then we have diagnostics in the background that we look at to say, okay, these folks are actually answering the questions to be politically correct. And we throw those out. Right? And we want the truth. And so in doing this kind of research, when I'm working with companies, I'm talking to the senior leadership team, I'm saying my team and I, my research team and I will give you the aggregated results. We're not going to give you the individual results, and we're going to do all kinds of diagnostics to show you that this is valid research. And there are a lot of statistics.
Technique for sure. And I think that's an important lesson for leaders here is that it's not something you can just walk up and ask.
No.
Like what employee is going to be like, no, it's miserable to work here. You're a jerk. We're under too much stress and everybody's about ready to quit. Like it has to get that bad sometimes until people actually speak up, and if you don't create ways, I think third parties is another great way to do that. So I love that you did the research from the outside and you can guarantee that anonymity. We also see that a lot with Sandler trainers and stuff, that
Right.
they're willing to tell their trainer something they're not willing to tell their sales manager, or it takes an independent eye to realize, that you're like, oh, I thought that's just the way they always operated. And when you walk in from the outside, you go, wait, what's going on here? This doesn't
Right.
seem
That's
right to
right.
me.
It
Like,
happens.
you
Yeah,
can
it
see
happens.
it. It's a lot easier to read the label from outside the bottle. That's
Yeah.
my favorite metaphor.
Yeah.
Any other final thoughts here on the book, Making Differences Work, Dr. Eli Jones and Paul Sarvadi? Final thoughts here? Anything I should have asked? Anything we didn't cover?
I want everybody to get a copy of this. All right. I'll give them away. I mean, what Paul and I want, this is not about the money. It's about the message. It really is. It's about the message. And unfortunately, we're at a time when we are divided in our country. Mm-hmm. Right. So we're not tackling the societal issues. This is specific to the workplace. Okay. This is about the workplace. No question about it. But we do believe some of the research that we're sharing in this book can indeed change the hearts and minds of people. We have personal stories in this book. All right. We included personal stories. And when you read those stories, the folks who have read the book and have given us feedback, they've said, wow, that really resonated with me. All right. These personal stories. And what we'd like is for everyone to get a copy and say, you know what? When we start really focusing on our commonalities and not so much on our differences, we build a better workplace. We could indeed build a better society if we really started thinking about how much we have in common.
What you look for is what you're most likely to find, right? I think that's the big lesson there, and it's true in your sales, in your life and professional development and stuff. So great one, and I appreciate you sharing. Now, I wanted to get to know you a little bit better, Eli.
Sure.
4 quick questions for you here. Number 1, how do you define success at this point in your career? You mentioned you're on your 3rd one. You've had a lot of success already. What does that mean to you?
Yeah. So I focus on impact, right? I focus on impact, and I've got very clear examples of impact. I wrote another book, Run Toward Your Goliaths, and it's a personal faith story. It really is what that one is about. And I talk about my dad in there. My dad had a 6th grade education, was an entrepreneur, he had 3 businesses, an entrepreneur. And so he made such an impact on me, Mike. He passed in 2008, but I can still hear him in my mind.
For sure.
I can still remember his lessons, right? That's a legacy. That's impact. When someone's gone and that person is still teaching you, that's success.
That's a good one. On the flip side, was there a failure you're most proud of, or a particular hurdle you had to get over in order to be successful?
Yeah, lots of hurdles. Lots of hurdles for sure. We all learn. In fact, I have grandchildren. I have 10 grandchildren. I have a great grand, believe it or not.
Wow.
But I talk to my grandchildren. They range from 21 to 8. And I always talk about, hey, try some things. I love, I'm very curious. That helps me in my profession. I'm curious. I don't take anything for granted. I want to dig in and understand it better. And I'm trying to encourage my grandchildren to explore. And along the way, you're going to make some mistakes, fail fast, learn from those mistakes, and you'll be a better person. Right. And so that's how I'm teaching my grandkids. If that's good enough for my grandkids and my kids, it's good enough for you.
What was the hardest lesson for you to learn?
Don't quit. I have a dear friend who's the CEO of Halliburton. His name is Jeff Miller. Jeff Miller is a friend. I put him in my other book, Run Toward Your Goliaths. And one of the statements that he made when I invited him to come and speak to our students at Mays Business School some years ago, he said this, and it stuck with me. Don't quit 5 minutes before your blessing. There's so many people that'll quit. And I mean, you give it just a little bit more time and you're about to get a huge blessing. You just quit too soon, right? So I had to really learn that. And I take that to heart. And I tell my kids, don't quit 5 minutes before you're blessed. There's one that's right there. And sometimes we just quit too soon.
I love that. Now, we may have already answered my other questions that I was going to ask, but I'll give you another shot at this one. Do you have any other favorite quotes, mottos, or mantras that you try to remember?
Oh, I'm a big Zig Ziglar fan. I am. And you know the one I love the most? You can have everything you want in life if you help enough others get what they want. And I teach sales around that quote. You know, we're helping our buyers get what they want and need. And sometimes they're latent needs. I go into that stuff.
Yeah.
You know, what is a latent need? But if we focus on, we can have everything we want if we help enough others get what they want. If we focus on that, we become better. You know, we become better salespeople, better sales leaders, better senior leaders, better CEOs, right? Yeah.
Yeah. That's so good. And I've been lucky enough to have Zig Ziglar's son on this podcast.
Oh, Tom.
So,
Yeah.
You can search for Tom Ziglar in our past episodes if you want to hear that. And you can get a ticket to the Sandler Summit if you want to hear more from Dr. Eli Jones. If you made it this far, I feel like you do want to hear more. So go to sandler.com/summit. The tickets are as cheap as they are ever going to be before the summit right now. So get the lowest price locked in. Get your tickets to see us in Orlando, March 19th and 20th, and meet us live. Dr. Eli is going to be on the big main stage in front of 1,000 awesome top sales and sales leaders from around the world. And we want you to be there and included in that group. So Sandler.com/summit. Don't forget about the book, Making Differences Work, Dr. Eli Jones and Paul Sarvadi. And until next time, whatever you are, be a good one. That's what I always say. Go out there and get it done. The podcast brought to you by Sandler Training. And don't forget to click on that resources tab. You can get more information. There's blogs, white papers, webinars. We have good stuff coming up, and go check that out at Sandler.com. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye. See you there.